Introducing the most versatile bag pattern. Watch through to see how it is made. Here and welcome back to BOCHIKNOT Macrame. If you're in search of a fun and fashionable project to make, then you've come to the right place. In this tutorial, I will be going over how to make a macrame backpack that you can also turn into a macrame shoulder bag or crossbody bag. And here is the bag. As you can see, this is the front of the bag with tie tassels. We've actually added magnetic bag clasps here for some extra security for the bag. And then at the back here is where we can see that it looks like a backpack with the backpack straps. So this way, it can be worn like a backpack. But you can take off these straps. I'm just going to take one of them off to show you, because you do only just need one for this part, and you can attach them to the inside sides of the pattern. And I'm just going to roughly see where I can attach this to. Do the same thing on the other side. You can actually turn this into a shoulder bag just by reattaching the straps a different way. You can also make longer straps, so you can turn this into a crossbody bucket bag as well. In this video, I'll just be going over how to make the overall bag and then the two backpack straps. A special tool you will need for this pattern is a crochet hook, just so we can mount the initial cords onto the square knot pattern. Almost this entire backpack pattern is made with square knots, but this particular square knot pattern is slightly different than our usual alternating square knots. Instead of using your usual working cords for the square knots, I've used adjacent cords instead to form a different look of the square knot pattern. If you guys are not sure what I'm talking about, don't worry, watch through to see how that is done. This is a fun and versatile project that you definitely have to make, and with all of that said, let's get right into it. Listed here are the materials you will need for this pattern and also the suggested cord lengths in the order that we will be using them. The cord that I will be using today is a single strand cord from our rainbow cord line. I am using 3.5 millimeter in size just because certain colors of our 3mm batch this time came out thicker, so it's actually closer to a true 4mm. So if you're going to use the same size cord without running out of cord, I would recommend using a true 4mm or our 3.5 millimeter from the rainbow cord line. This is a nice, sturdy, soft cord. It is super easy to work with and it doesn't unravel super easily. This is a nice, comfortable cord to work with at all skill levels. You will also need some swivel lobster clasps with D-rings underneath. So the approximate width of the D-rings here are 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to be using silver colored ones. You will also need one set of magnetic bag clasps. I am using these sew-on ones so that you can sew on each side of the clasp onto the bag. I personally feel the sew-on ones are easier to work with for macrame in comparison to the ones that have claws that you can bend and then secure onto either the fabric or macrame, just because macrame cord is fairly thick sometimes, so it's kind of hard to attach those ones with claws onto the macrame. So to begin, we're going to make a square knot ring pattern, and to do that, we're going to take our first two strands of cord at 100 centimeters long. We're going to pin or tape down the top ends, and then taking our 600 centimeter long cord, we're going to bring it to the back of these two vertical cords right in the center of the 600 centimeter long cord, and we're going to use the outer left and right cord ends as working cords for a square knot. We're making this first square knot several inches downwards from the top. I would say leave, give or take, 6 inches of space at the top where the vertical cord ends are, because we will go back to it later on. Using the same working cords, we're going to continue downwards for some consecutive square knots until we've made a total of 52 square knots. So we've made 2 here, we're going to add 50 more. Once we're done with the 52 square knots, we're going to match the ends together. So the anchor cord ends on both sides, and then on each side we're going to snip off 1 strand of cord. Then with the remaining anchor cords, we're going to overlap them, and then on one end we're going to continue with these 2 overlapping anchor cords in the middle for 4 more square knots. This is how we're going to connect the square knot pattern into a ring-like pattern afterwards. Make 2 more square knots after this. Once done, pull on the anchor cords from both sides so that the pattern is tightened and the square knot pattern now becomes a square knot ring. Now we can cut off all of the excess cords from the anchor cord group, making sure that we don't cut off the last 2 working cord ends just yet. So cut off everything else, leaving the 2 working cords. With the 2 working cord ends, what we're going to do is, using either a crochet hook or needle, we're going to thread through the working cord ends through some of the square knot loops. Start off with one end by making a loop on the side of the square knot pattern first, so that it resembles a loop from the square knot pattern beside it. Then with the other cord end on the other side, do the same thing. Now once the cord ends are threaded through on the sides of the square knot pattern, we're now going to tuck it through the inside of the square knot loops. So taking one cord end, we're going to thread it through our first loop inside of the square knot pattern. Then repeat using the same cord and thread it through a few more loops. Once done, we're going to do the same thing with the other cord end through 3 loops. Now we're going to cut off the excess cords because they have been tucked in. And this will form our square knot pattern that we are going to mount the majority of our bag cords onto. To do this part, you will need a crochet hook and then also our 240 centimeter strands of cord. Taking a strand of 240 centimeter long cord, we're going to fold it in half, and then on the loop end, we're going to use a crochet hook and we're going to bring it through the bottom loop of the square knot pattern, and then we're going to make a reverse lark's head knot. So decide on which side of the square knot ring pattern we're going to attach these cords on, and then we're going to attach all 56 strands onto the bottom loops with reverse lark's head knots. Now continue this all around. Once all 56 strands of cord are attached to the bottom of the square knot pattern, this is what it should look like, and we are now ready to start on the majority of the bag pattern with our square knot pattern. To do this, we're going to take 4 cords and we're going to start off with a square knot, just like how we usually make it. Then with the next 4 cords right beside it, make another square knot, then continue this row of square knots all around. So once the top row of square knots are made, we're going to add a second row of square knots underneath. To do that, we're going to take a square knot from the square knot row that we had just made. And I'm just going to separate out some cords just so that you guys can clearly see which cords I'm grabbing. So we're working with the 3 square knots here, and the one in the middle we're going to keep the same anchor cords. So we're always going to keep the right working cord above and then the left working cord underneath, and then we're going to use the same anchor cords in the middle and we're going to make a square knot. So we're borrowing the working cords from adjacent square knots to make this square knot. We're going to repeat the same pattern again right beside it. So over on the left side, bringing the left working cord underneath and then the right working cord's already on top, we're going to make another square knot. So what's different about this square knot row is that you can see that the square knot we're making is not in the middle in between the 2 square knots, it's directly underneath the square knot that we have made above. So we're going to take this square knot pattern and we're going to repeat it all around for this row. So once the second row of square knots are made, this is what the pattern should look like. You should have what looks like a column of square knots. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to alternate that position now. So similar to how you usually make alternating square knots, in between two square knots that we had made in the second row, we're going to make an alternating square knot underneath, just like how we usually make alternating square knots. And we're going to repeat this all around for this third row of square knots. Now that our third row of square knots are done, what we're going to do is we're going to borrow the adjacent working cords again, just like what we did in the second row of square knots above. So the right working cord should be above, the left working cord should be underneath, and then make that square knot. Repeat this all around. We have now made two sections of this unique alternating square knot pattern. We're making it 2 rows at a time. We've already made 2 sections here. We're going to continue downwards for a total of 12 sections, so 10 more sections below. Once you have completed all 12 square knot sections, this is what the pattern should look like. You should have very close knit square knots. Weave together. And now we're going to start sealing off the bottom of the bag. To do that, we're going to separate out sections at the bottom. Using the second last section of square knots as a reference, we're going to measure downwards for 12 square knots, just like where I am holding it here. So on the left and on the right. And then directly underneath, we're going to make a square knot to hold that spot. Now fill in the row of square knots in between the first and the last square knot here. Now directly underneath, we're going to make a row of alternating square knots. So in between the left 2 square knots, make a square knot and then repeat all the way to the right side. Now that this slanted pattern is done on the front side, we're going to flip it over to the back and we're going to repeat the same thing. But what we're going to do is we're going to skip 2 square knots in between, and then we're going to start our 12 knot section right there. So you should have 2 square knots left over in between on both sides once you're done the 12 square knots at the back. Once done, this is what the pattern should look like at the back and at the front, with an even number of square knots on the sides. This is what the sides should look like. If you refer to the second last section, there should be 2 square knots in between, which we are going to make right now. So starting with the far left 4 cords, make a square knot, and then do the same thing with the right 4 cords. Then just like the front and back sides, we're going to make a second row of square knots underneath, and this time it's just 1 square knot in the middle. Now we're going to repeat this same pattern on the other side for an upside down triangle. So once all 4 sides have been made, we're going to flip the pattern inside out. Once the bag is inside out, continue to work on the bottom. What we're going to do is work on one of the sides of the pattern first, so you can see the upside down triangle here. We're going to gather the cords on the left side for 2 square knots and then repeat the same thing on the right side. So to do this, we're going to take the cords from the front flap and the side flap, and we're going to take the middle 4 cords there, and we're going to make a square knot. So taking the 2 cords in the middle as anchor cords. Then taking the next working cord down on both sides, make another square knot onto the same anchor cords. Now repeat this exact same pattern on the right side. Now that we have joined up the sides here on this side, we're going to repeat the exact same pattern on the other side. So once the square knots are complete on both sides of the pattern, we're going to continue on with one side. And using the anchor cords that we had used on both sides here, we're now going to use them as working cords for square knots, with the middle 2 cords continuing as the anchor cords. Then taking the next 2 cords down on the front and back sides of the pattern, and we're going to continue making a few more square knots onto the same anchor cords here. Continue this pattern until a total of 8 square knots are made. We've made 3 square knots here now. Make 5 more. Once all 8 square knots are made on this side, we're going to repeat the same thing on the other side. The only difference on this side is because we made the square knots left facing on the other side, to make sure that they look the same across, we're going to have to make opposite facing square knots on this side. So on this side, we're going to make right facing square knots. To do that, switch the first half knot, pulling the cords out on the right side, and then finish off with another opposite half knot, pulling the cords through the left side this time. Now take the next 2 cords down on both sides and repeat the same thing. Now make 6 more square knots down underneath. So once the square knots are made on both sides, we now have a little gap in the middle, and we are going to fill that section up with more square knots to seal the bottom of the bag. But before we do that, we're going to take the 2 anchor cords on both sides of the pattern, and we're just going to snip off 1 on each side. Keep the anchor cords overlapped on top of each other, and now we're going to start on whichever side you want to and continue downwards, filling up the remaining of the square knots. Now if you find that you don't have enough room, continue shifting the square knots towards the sides to make room. There should be enough room to finish all the remaining square knots. The only difference this time is that we have 2 overlapping anchor cords in between. Continue finishing up the remaining square knots. Once we are done the square knots, pull on the 2 anchor cords on both sides to tighten up the square knots. Then snip off the excess cords on those anchor cords. Bring the cords from underneath on one side and then now taking a strand of cord at 100 centimeters long, place it horizontally above the vertical cords, and then starting on the left side, take 1 cord at a time and attach it onto the horizontal anchor cord with double half hitch knots. Continue all the way to the right side. Pull on the anchor cords to tighten the knots. Then on the right side, what we're going to do is just taking the next 2 cords there from the sides, and we're going to attach them onto the anchor cord with double half hitch knots, and then continue the double half hitch knots on the other side back around. Then once you're back to where we started, take the 2 anchor cords and finish off with 1 last double half hitch knot. Then all you have to do here is cut off all of the excess cords at the bottom, leaving about 1 inch of fringe. Save your scrap cords, especially some of the longer scrap cords, because we're going to keep them for the tassels later on. Once all the fringe is cut, we can now turn the back inside out.